Welcome back to Illuminating Being. I'm your co-host, Dr. Elizabeth Cook, joined again by co-host Dr. Keith Summers. Today, we are looking to close out a series that I'm going to coin. Maybe we'll be creative, like living awake, being aware. And it was a journey through the various senses and how they shape our relationship with food, with our bodies, and really just life itself. So I think it was a really great exploratory adventure that you and I went on the past 5 episodes. So for any new listeners, go back and check those out. And so what we did is we explored specifically like taste, which is an obvious one, smell, sight, touch. And then I think the most difficult was hearing, but it was a great conversation. I would agree, right?
Yeah.
And then even a little bit of that deeper, that sixth sense that you always brought up. And what?
Proprioception.
Yeah. So like awareness of your body and like, right? Like your
Where we
spatial
are.
concept, right? Yeah.
Right.
So today's conversation will just be a little bit different, but we're going to kind of step back, zoom out, and really how does it all interconnect? And like something about these conversations that we've been having and really our opportunity to share with, our members of the community, family and friends is the big idea. Food is not just fuel, right? It's really a mind, body, spirit experience. So I look forward to jumping in and kind of exploring some of these bigger zoomed out thoughts related to senses. So welcome back, Dr.
Great to be back, and it's always great to see you. And we have a lot of smiles in our world here, and I think food does create opportunities. And I think we talked about the rituals and family meals, and I guess that's sort of the place maybe we start at, because a lot of us have our early memories revolve around the family meal, and a lot of those are holidays and rituals that we perform. And food, all the senses are typically we're more reminded of those, right? So if you walk into grandma's house, first you see grandma's house, so you're like, oh, the anticipation of what's going to come, because you have a memory. And I guess that's sort of what makes our human species and being so interesting, is that how we are formed and the interconnectedness of all of these senses create the memories, right? So each of them do reflect back on that. And smell, we've talked about that one, that's closest in the brain when it comes to, proximity of memory. So that's why a lot of times you're walking into some room, into someone's house, it evokes that memory, right? And so that then influences what we do next sometimes, like walking into grandma's house and you smell the roast, you smell the potatoes, you smell all of that. It's sort of like salivation starts, and you're like, the anticipation of your stomach starts grumbling. And then it could have opposite effects too, right? I mean, that's not to say that everyone's walking into a house that the food experience is always one that you're looking forward to, right? So I think that's reality. So we don't want to sort of paint this stroke that every food, every sense is going to create a positive. There's aversions that are out there too, of things we stay away from. But for the most part, it is the essence of creating the who we are, and how we navigate it. And, we all think of certain foods, there are chocolates and ice creams of really, sweets that sort of drive a certain thing. But not everybody is like sweet driven, right? I mean, there are people who don't. And you put, and we express ourselves and we have language about a lot of these sort of things, which helps us to sort of create the sort of mood and the tone of what that experience is. So, that's part of the conversation.
So for our listeners, one thing I love, and I've been told I'm very linear minded, linear focused. And, I have my bestie who's very circular and tangential and exploratory. So for our listeners, just kind of phrase up some questions to give you the opportunity to provide some sound bites, right? So that are, there's actionable or there's tools that we can take into our day to day, either into the kitchen, into your parenting, into your relationship building. I mean, I think that's why you and I want to show up, because when we think about knowledge, everyone can gain full access to like an enormous amount of information right now because of what we live in. But what I actually just spoke at a big conference last week in the energy industry, and I spoke to the leadership around engineering and operations and kind of the duality of the two workforces. There's a point to this. And I like came together as like, we have this enormous amount of knowledge. So a lot of people come out of whatever training thinking that they can do it, right? And we lose sight of this, what is wisdom, which is the connection of a breadth of knowledge with actual experience to then grow this body of wisdom. And so I think we're forgetting about that when we're mass producing all this information, making it available to us. So my goal is to make it, somewhat tangible and actionable as we like talk through these beautiful topics. So here's my question to you. And for our listeners, we try to make it natural, so I don't give them a lot of advance notice.
There's no advance notice.
Yeah, there is.
We have conversations, but we have, and it's been the beauty of this relationship since you've started coming to the office, is that, it's just spontaneous talk. And I think it's honoring the fact that, in my view, when I see patients and families, is that I don't know everything. And I also don't know where everybody's coming from. So that's really important in medicine and in anything, right? To sort of not only know your audience, but have a respect for the fact that everybody comes to the conversation with some knowledge and maybe concept of what they, are thinking and growing.
Well, it sounds like you were sitting in the audience after my panel. Okay. And that was a big takeaway, right? Like, who are these people that's showing up for these jobs and how do we train and develop? Okay. So the first question, so exploring the sense and the depth like we did, looking at them together, and you kind of alluded to this one a little bit in your intro, but, how do you see them interacting in the space of nourishment, right? Especially for the child.
Yeah. So I think that the senses are sort of the ultimate sort of starting point, right? So, big at promoting breastfeeding, right? So in that breastfeeding or feeding, even if it's a bottle and formula, there's a lot of experience of touch, of cuddling and coddling that infant and the surroundings. And we just don't know what their experience is because it is unique to them, right? But there are things that we can do to help to promote, that positive sort of interaction. Things that you eat in your diet as you're pregnant will give exposure to that infant and throughout the first year. So they taste things that are in the diet that you've eaten, whether it goes from garlic to broccoli to you name it. There is some chemical piece to that. And everything's a chemical reaction, right? So all of these things, and then they're transmitted. And, this is the beauty of electricity that brings Liz here with me, is that it's a current, right? That goes in our bodies that takes the visual, the smell, all of our senses gets translated through some electrical impulse that gets deciphered by, this experience. And that's been whatever millions of years in the development of this human body, right? But I think one of the things that's really important is to expose our children from a very early age to as many different sort of sounds and tastes and touches. And that's been my sort of prototype. As I'd say in training, we don't get a lot of nutrition training. We don't get a lot of how we should approach this. We get sort of cookbook, these are the things we do. And obviously in any sort of workflow, you need to have sort of a precept of like, okay, this is a fundamental way to move through how to feed somebody. But then it's really the art, right? So that's medicine it's an art and a science, right? So how I deliver it and how my peers deliver it becomes the unique part of like what brings people to any one of us to continue that sort of relationship is that you develop an art of stylistic way of creating and delivering this information. And coaching, guiding, I mean, I think we get this, trained degree and, MD, but, in essence, I mean, that's a relatively new sort of identifier when it comes to, how long we've been around. I mean, there were people who were training, didn't go to medical school, but learned many of the essences of like healthy living.
Right. And I mean, they learned from an experience, right? And really taking the leap and believing in the confidence. Like before there was all of this educational and programmatic and systematic way to like bless you as a healer or a doctor. Like there was a genuine human to human connection of how to share and embrace and be confident in whatever you're sharing with your community. And I think, you're thinking about all of our visits, I have been very blessed and privileged and grateful that my children were in your graces only very infrequently based on, wellness, yearly wellness appointments. And now that I think about you talking, something that you probably, maybe you did have intention but the value of your consistency and the approach that you took with the child each time, no matter their age. And like, I don't think you were thinking this, but like you genuinely were asking them as individuals these questions of their full self. So, like asking them about the food they eat, what they're reading in school, what are their activities, and really just giving them this really open space, one with an adult, and hopefully the mother sits back and doesn't talk. But there was a beauty in that. And I think, when the kids got older, now like I have 3 adult children, I mean, they knew what to expect when visiting you, and it created a safe space, right, to like explore. And I think, I don't know if you were attaching the senses, but your questions, now that I think about them, were all aligned to the full human experience of like that year's growth. And you asked them, to kind of share. So,
Well, and speaking of, we're now in electronic records, right? So one of the really fun parts, starting practice, is that we had paper charts. And one of the things that I miss today about the paper charts is that we would open the chart on the inside. I would typically have, because every year families would take their holiday photos, so we would have, or a school photo, so they would bring a photo to the office and we would put it. So over the course of 18 years, you might see 10 or 12 or 15 pictures of this child as they've grown, right? And so we don't have that now, which I feel like is unfortunate.
all right.
And then, what I always like to do is write things down about what the kids are doing. So when they come in the next year, they're playing the violin, they're playing soccer, right? Something that's sort of a connector. Because, I mean, sure, we all can remember a lot of things about people, but, and I think when you see them, it sort of, I mean, our brains are computers with a vast amount of memory. And it's surprising what you do remember when you see somebody, right? About the last conversation, even if it was a year ago, right? Sometimes you get it wrong where you're like close, but it's just that it just means it's more meaningful, right? It's more connect. And I think it's always about relationships, right? And I think whether it's coming to the doctor or in a family, I mean, family is about relationships, and that's the family meal is the sort of basis of where you can help to establish relationships, interactions, valuing each person who's around the table, giving them all the space to be themselves. And I see a lot of families and it's all different.
Right.
Every family has a different dynamic. There's different power levels in every family, and that's just human, right? It's not going to change. And so I think, trying to identify that stuff and help families navigate those different things is sort of what makes me tick a little bit. It's not that I'm trying to win at any of these sort of things. It's just trying to sort of help the negotiation of like because you can change people in some ways, but it's really my job isn't to change people. It's to help people figure out what they need.
I just heard a quote in a silly movie. you can only change someone who wants to be changed. So you can
Right.
provide insight and guidance along the
Right.
way. Uh, okay. This is kind of connected too. They're all connected. And you kind of said it, tying it to this idea is, eating nourishment is the earliest form of connection. So maybe explore, like I mean, there's the breastfeeding and the connection with the mother, but like that sensory experience of the particular meal, and then, bring it all together. Like, how
Yeah.
you walk
So
through
I
the,
think there's my wife and I were just talking about it. She's a pediatrician as well. And I think, we now are in this hyper aware world and so much information. And then there's all these food allergies that now have become prominent. And then how, these allergic foods, like what do you start with? How much do you give? And I don't want to poo-poo things per se and sort of like not give credence to the fact that yes, things can happen, but it's like life. I mean, I'm a believer in removing fear. Like I feel like fear should not be the driving force of how we approach food. We all have to eat. And yes, I mean, safety in food. So we don't give a hot dog or a raisin to a 6 or 9 month old. There's choking hazards. So there's common sense sort of things that hopefully I don't have to teach, but we say these things, right? Just as common courtesy to saying yes. I mean, if you've never been in the situation of feeding a child, you might have the grandparent around or somebody you've observed, but it seems like it's food. And they're interested in it. And you can see when, 4 to 6 months, the alertness and awareness of that child is all eyes on those around them. So if you're eating, they're watching you, right? They watch your mouth move, and they're just watching that all. And then you open your mouth, they open their mouth. And everybody's like, oh, well, they must be hungry. Well, it doesn't, we make a lot of judgment on what kids think, right? And so that's part of my biggest challenge is to sort of say like a newborn, they're sucking when they come out. Everybody's like, you have to feed them right away. Well, not every sucking is hunger. There's nutritive, non-nutritive, but when you're the new parent and you're like, oh my God, they're crying, they're sucking, they must be hungry, I must feed them, and that's not going to change. But my hope is to sort of provide some knowledge, information going into it, which we're not there yet, but I'm hoping to be able to supply more information before people deliver their babies so that they go into just like they have 9 months of seeing the obstetrician. I don't think I need to see them for 9 months, but in the last 3 months, it would be very helpful to start having conversations of what to anticipate and expect for your newborn and in those first months. And it really doesn't exist today. So maybe that is another area where we can sort of
and
expand.
thinking about, why, like, we've been making babies for many, many years. So, when we think what's not like, and this came up last, see, it's all interconnected. This came up also another panel I was hosting, but this like space of communal beings, like the information and the sharing of like how to attend, well, one, how to deliver a baby was very natural. The women in the community came together to, safely bring, and sadly sometimes not safely, but then also there was the lineage of thought based on the generational perspective of loved ones, so that when the baby did come, there was the instinctual connection of the mother, but there was also a community, a village that, informed and educated. So sadly, we have gotten or found ourselves in a space where we read a book, or like we don't ask the pediatrician that may someday be a part of my child's life in advance to help prepare mentally. And I think that's something we could just share is, just a remembrance that we are communal beings, and having this information share is, there's no shame in it. It's like our expectation of how we thrive is that sharing of knowledge.
Well, I think we've done a huge disservice to the indigenous populations of the world. Like the sort of knowledge that they cover and what they had wasn't written, but the medicine men and women, I mean, and, we've created these urban sort of nightmares in some respects. So the fact that we're moved away from having all these farms and people are moving into city centers is really making it challenging to do some of the things that come more naturally to beings. And I think, small villages, the success of raising somebody, a child, was based on the fact that you had many members of the community. So even though, just like they
Yeah.
call you auntie, they call you uncle. I mean, everybody's your auntie or uncle because they're all part of your life.
Right.
And so now we have, you know, better or worse, you raise your children, they move to California, they move to Texas. Well, I know.
No, you won't. No, I'm just kidding.
And so their community doesn't go with them. So if you end up raising your family and you're 1,000 miles away from your family, who, you may have some friends, but it's not in your, physical close proximity. And so that's where I think a lot of the challenge, anxiety, and what creates some of the work that, we end up having to manage and look for podcasts and look for, Instagrams and Facebook groups or
Friendly
whatever that's
shows
going to
willing to,
be
yeah.
a support group, right? And I think, which is natural because we are, at the end of the day, as humans, we're looking for relationships, right? And they are the essence. I mean, you can certainly survive on your own. That's a possibility, but that doesn't provide for growth. And at the end of the day, it's, a very few that may live a solitary life somewhere in the world. For
I
the
mean, we've
most
all
part,
watched Castaway.
yeah.
I diverge.
So, but I think, it does segue. And I think the overlaps between the different sciences and medicine and, electricity and these sort of things, that there's a lot of things that are in common in these different spheres. um, and how we can bring those together. And
Nation of trust, and where do we get our resources, and who's the authoritative voice, and yeah, there's there. We could get real philosophical. I will another, you know, thinking about, I remember moving onto a street and it was a dead end, and I genuinely was raised where we really weren't very connected to our neighbors, so it wasn't like it was a learned trait. But I wanted my children to have that free spirited space, but I'm a new generation, and it was like the whole helicopter versus the free range, and I'm very free range. I have a little grounding for my husband, but I really went out, and it was very uncomfortable, and introduced myself in ways with my neighbors because I wanted them to know that I believe that they were a part of my village. And if you see my kids misbehaving, yell at them, put them in their place, you know what I mean, in all respect, but just generally giving over that permission and awareness that I see them and I want to be a part of their lives. And I think back on that because I actually moved from the street and I miss them dearly. But there was a lot there. I was a very young mother at the time, and extending that olive branch, it was powerful because it ended up being a great place
no,
to raise my own.
but I think we have a similar story. We moved onto our street, and there were older families. There weren't a lot of younger kids, so we had the idea we would have a block party.
Right.
And
I
so
was
we
the
made
block
arrangements,
party lead. I was like,
and that's what we did for about 20 years. And we handed over the reins to a younger generation. But, you know, it was a Sunday afternoon. The kid, we'd call off the street. Our kids could ride their bikes. People would all bring some food. We made name tags. People sat, and, we have dog walkers. We have all sorts of people that come by the street. But it was sort of the moment where you had a conversation beyond just, hi, how are you? Nice to see you. And find out, the history of the street. And it's carried on, and then many younger families moved on as some older families moved and people passed away, so that it was sort of a rebirth of the street. And it is good to know your neighbors. I mean, I think in today's world it's very easy to just be passing each other by, without having any connection.
okay, here's my other question for you. And I'll pull the takeaways in our show write up. Okay, so you work with families daily, and we've kind of talked around this, but like, what's an environment or an example, like a practical, like go do, I guess, in creating this sensory rich type environment for like we just talked about block parties, but like maybe, another example.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I think, one, I'm all for just allowing the kids to explore, right? So I think from the table, squishing food, getting them really in touch with what it is, right? And then I think reading comes into this too, where you're reading books about some of these experiences, um, getting down on the floor with the kids, getting into the dirt in the backyard, planting. My son years ago planted an avocado seed, and I don't know, it's probably 15 years. We never thought it was going to grow into anything, but it did sprout, and it's got like 3 leaves, and it's probably never going to be a full grown tree, but they take like 20 or 30 years anyway, so who knows? But it hasn't died, right? But watching something, and that's like with spices and things where they grow pretty quickly. And for Earth Day, a couple years, we've given out seeds so that kids can watch. I mean, kids are so enthralled
we actually are
with,
doing that right now with Finley in
yeah.
our little window. He's very engaged with it.
And, and you'd be surprised at what kids are sort of interested in, right? So I think one of the biggest things is to not make any assumptions about anybody, right? Because things that really energize kids or catch their fancy, sometimes they're just, it rains, the worms are coming out. They like to go out and see them. And there's that smell of after the first rain, right? Of what it smells like, with all those worms coming out of the ground. Digging up and planting, tulips or whatever, or making your garden. So I think engaging the kids and bringing them to be part of what you're doing is really helpful.
Love it. And I think now talking about it is like thinking about my own childhood. At the time, I remember many moments where I'm like, Mom, like, I don't want to sit by this creek and listen. But she did that to us for a lot of times, right? So it wasn't just once. And so just the realization of like how powerful that what was, because now I'm immersed and I love nature, but like, did she know it would have such a profound impact? But she was always kind of like bringing us to and sharing stories. And I don't even think they were stories that she had herself. So that's another thing. It's like I have to experience these as a child. Like as an adult, know the power of immersing, the ones that you're in care of all these experiences. Um, so I know we always have a book that you love to, I would love to hear which book you're thinking about to share with the audience, as well as, your general quote before we kind of wrap it in a bow with one
Yeah.
last question. But we'll
Yeah.
make sure you get that.
Yeah. So I've just started this book. It's called Better in Every Sense, since we were talking about the senses. These gentlemen were interviewed there from the University of Toronto. And so really looking at how we respond to the world and stress and what's basically innately in us. How we've sort of touched on mindfulness and all of that. And there's the whole Buddhist sort of aspect of self-awareness and those sort of things. And I think what it looks like they're leading into is that, and one of the things that I think I've found in the last few years, that we've had a lot more stressors in our world, from COVID and pandemics to just many externalities that are going on in everybody's life. Not to mention just the overwhelming nature of news and information that, you know, you can turn it off, but it's hard to avoid. And so I think one of the things that I've been adopting, as well as, and I think they're looking at some science behind it, is that we're not going to stop our thoughts on these sort of things, or we can mitigate and maybe decrease the amount of volume of it, but there's always going to be some of that volume. But then our response to it is what's always at play, right? And that it's sort of inertly, it's who we are. But our senses are sort of the opportunity to sort of manage it and to offload it. And so that's where mindfulness shows up, in that taking a walk in nature, having a good meal, and enjoying those sort of things will offset the stressors. right? And I think we can certainly in the future, as I read through this book, be able to expand more on the value and sort of really our toolbox is within us, you know, figuring out how we use the tools we have to sort of navigate the ups and downs in life. And then also to sort of take advantage of that as we're parents and trying to raise our kids and show them some of the ways. And I mean, the one telltale sign I think for parenting is role modeling, right? So whatever you do, the eyes are all on us as parents and they watch our every move. So whatever you're doing, they are mindfully watching you, and then they become us in some respects. Whether they want to have those traits or not, they will adopt some of them. Um, and then we've talked about just formation of habits. So, it's not that they're bad habits, but sometimes we have to sort of create some change in the way we do things. And so our senses are also one of the ways that we can sort of, manage that going forward.
So there was a lot there.
Always.
And so one, you recommend that book. But I guess for some reason, and maybe that's spaced out in, is this idea it's kind of that rush behavior and like we're in this world of like information coming and we have to find that space which leads to this. So like the idea of arrival fallacy, has this word come up in your space? And we as beings, right? Or maybe just since the Industrial Revolution, we're in this like reach a certain goal, like achieve a milestone, I arrived at my future version of myself, when I lose weight, when the kids are grown, when I get a promotion, right? It's like constant. And I think maybe it's hopefully in this generation, maybe midlife and beyond, you can tell me, Dr. Summers, but like what I'm finding from my peers and really books, and I think maybe this
Right.
book is leading to it, is that, if we're constantly chasing this next arrival, we disconnect ourselves from life and this aspect of being the community. So I think I forget the professor, but it was like a term, that came out from psychology. But it's like a real thing because I remember I'll just share, like going back to that pictures, like I had to pull my oldest son's 18 years worth of school and baby pictures because he's graduating in like 2
Right.
weeks, right? So like,
Oh,
uh,
congratulations.
right, like he's grown, right? And you're about to like face a wedding, right? Like, oh, I've raised them to meet their mate, and go on. So I guess just to ground ourselves in that idea, it's in the senses, right? It's in the presence. It's in the now that is it. And so I think there's so much power in just that realization. Look, I just moved myself. Anyway, maybe I'm in a lot of arrival spaces. I think right now in my career and
Hey.
my parenting and who I am. But really, you breathe. So like the sensation of breathing. They tell you to go outside and breathe in. It's all there, and we've been talking about it for 6 episodes. Anyway, I love it.
Right. Well, and I think that sixth sense of balance, right? And what we're trying to create is some balance in our lives, right? Um, eh, right now, I think we probably have this background noise, which is, of course, when I go doing these podcasts and my landscapers are here doing the
I
lawn
love it.
thing.
It's real
That's
life, but I think I can clean it up, so we're good.
Yeah, so that's good. But it's sort of like a distraction, and I think that does sort of tell a tale of life that there are many distractions sometimes. So we're on a course, something may impact us or create a deviation, a disconnect. So I think it's sort of proprioception and balance is sort of righting ourselves in those moments. So we sometimes will get a little bit off kilter. But to your point, there's a huge emotionality. And I think I did write down one thing's about emotions and memory, and that basically our senses are sort of the linchpin of all of this, right? So we get up in the morning, you smell the sheets, you smell the air, you hear the birds chirping. It sort of creates the tone for the day, right? I mean, one of the things my day usually begins going out to get the newspaper, and I've got this Merlin app. I don't know if you have it from Cornell.
Yep, you recommended it. Downloaded it.
Totally, I've been recommending it and sharing it with families coming in. But the nice part is it records all these birds and I can replay them. And some mornings I've had 6 or 8 birds, and so I'll spend a minute or two just listening to that. And it's one of those things, it's a reset, right? It's sort of like an energizer. One of the things we haven't talked about, but I sort of mentioned this whole reading this book about Leonardo, or listening to this audiobook about Leonardo da Vinci. It is sort of the essence of creativity is sort of allowing these senses and letting ourselves experience life, right? And so we get caught up, and sometimes we hit roadblocks because we're programmed to do things A, B, C. It's sort of like some kids won't sit in class. Well, it doesn't mean they have ADHD. They just are seeing the world in a certain way sometimes, and they need to have that space. And unfortunately, we don't have classrooms that always allow them to have the space to do that.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. Looking at, we could talk forever, right? But
Yeah,
I truly believe that, this has been a very meaningful series. I look forward to diving in some additionals, but, I just want to pause and say thank you, Dr. Summers, really for sharing your wisdom, to showing up, your storytelling, and really just your understanding of what it means to be in this experience that we're in. So, um, it's about being present, engaging your senses, finding your joy, wonder, and connection. And so with that, hopefully you and I planted some seeds, no pun intended,
I
for
think
our
that's
listeners.
beautiful, Dr. Cook, and it's always a pleasure. And congratulations on the upcoming graduation.
Right. Feels like my own milestone. Just kidding. It's his. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.